moves. People of all cultures, all religions, all people, regardless of their many personal beliefs, move through space intentionally every single day of their lives. It's when movement becomes dance, however, that social contexts are constructed and dialogue is motivated, as dance has the ability to both challenge and transcend lines of humanity, and has been doing just that for thousands of years. This is clearly not a novice idea, as dance, the universal language, is the perfect vehicle for social change. As American dance historian Jackie Maloney describes in her book, Steppin' on the Blues, quote, "The goal of art is to provide humanity with basic equipment for living," end quote. All expressive movement, not always labeled as art or even as dance, however easily classified as either, has the potential to foster community simply by linking people with shared ideas. By using my understanding of dance, I recently managed to cross cultural, social, and political boundaries, building a community of movement that shared not only an experience, but a voice. Just this past February 14th, on Valentine's Day, I was involved in Brockport Breaks the Chain, a regional event under the 1 Billion Rising International Movement Against Domestic Violence. A quick search on YouTube, and you will be overwhelmed with the global response to this organization, flash mobs everywhere. As part of this cross-departmental team that organized the event at the college at Brockport, I led students and faculty alike through a series of pseudo-flash mobs, pseudo-site-specific, hybrid-type dances all over campus. As a sole student representative collaborating with a panel of faculty from various departments including dance, women and gender studies, and theater, it was my job to create a dance that the entire campus could perform. You may have noticed that I referred to the dance as pseudo-site specific. I say that because it had to work in 3 different locations, not just one, and none of them were on a proscenium stage. I had to create movement that could quickly adapt depending on the space, and I also needed to make sure it could be easily performed in various size groups depending on how many people showed up at each spot. So I guess you could say this dance was site unspecific, maybe even just site intended. As long as there was an open space, we could fill it with our moves. So the first step in making this site intended piece was to create the movement. It was my job to ensure that all movers, regardless of the level, could comfortably perform the entire dance. So I trusted people knew their right from their left and simply went from there. I found myself combining what I consider familiar moves, or what I coined bad wedding dance moves, in a series of short phrases. I assigned names to each action as a way of helping people, namely non-trained dancers, to remember. Names included the breakdown, the no, 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 the stupid move. Each move performed on the right was immediately performed to the left, and equal time spent on each phrase allowed for easy follow-along if necessary. Through a series of several rehearsals, or training sessions as we called them, I led hour-long meetings where anyone on campus who was interested could come to learn the dance. I also made a training video that was posted on YouTube with verbal instructions that went along as you watched. I'd now like to show you a short clip from this really great video.
Start with the simplest step.
Performed to Aretha Franklin's Respect, utilizing a well-known song as a way of initiating a sense of community, but also dancing along to Franklin's lyrics that essentially describe valuing and respecting others. The song was perfect. It's an instantly recognizable tune, and people could easily extrapolate the lyrics to the affirming environment we were creating with this powerful message conveyed through dance. This particular dance, however, was not about performing for an audience or even about being entertained. The goal here was to get as many people dancing as possible. We were hoping to dance together as one campus, moving for a cause that affects far too many people in the world. We were looking to raise awareness, to draw attention to something damaging that permeates our popular culture. What was originally scheduled to be 3 performances, one in the library, one in the student union, and one in the lobby of another major hub on campus, the Tower of Fine Arts, momentum gained throughout the day, and 3 performances eventually turned into 5. As the dances continued to happen, the number of participants also continued to grow. After a tragic death on campus earlier in the semester related to domestic violence made this event especially pertinent to our local community, Brockport Breaks the Chain was a success, even attracting the attention of Dateline NBC, who came to film later that afternoon. I'd now like to show you a clip from our first performance that morning in the library. If you remember, in addition to describing this event as a pseudosite-specific dance, I also described it as a sort of flash mob, but technically it wasn't either of those things. As I mentioned earlier, this dance was to be performed in unconventional spaces that were not a traditional stage. Keep in mind it was the development of dance on the proscenium stage that distanced the participants from the observers, employing a hierarchy that labeled one as doer and the other as spectator. Flash mobs, however, are simply a dance that takes place in the middle of a crowded area. All of a sudden, a gathering of people who 10 seconds ago appeared to have nothing in common move in perfect unison to a song blasting from a hidden corner. This setting was more in line with what we were going for here. The goal of Brockport Breaks the Chain was for the observers to also be the dancers, however. We wanted to create an interchangeable relationship between the audience and the performers. The entire Brockport community was invited to participate, and therefore the dance wasn't actually happening upon anyone. Similarly, domestic violence doesn't just happen to people. It's an ongoing problem that infiltrates every aspect of a victim's life: social, economic, physical, etc. So in this context, the dance was a flash mob. The important term to add to the definition, however, is spontaneity. Traditionally, flash mobs are seemingly spontaneous to their unassuming audiences. However, this event was not spontaneous. It was planned months in advance to once again foster a community in support of this important cause. In consideration of all of this, Brockport Breaks the Chain was a sort of flash mob, but what we conclude either way is that change happens when community is engaged with an eye on social issues. Dance is the ability to build, engage, develop, and even encourage that necessary foundation for community. A glance to the past demonstrates how dance has long been used as a tool for empowering and connecting large groups of people. When considering the ring shout, a dance performed as African slaves were shipped from their homes and forced into oppression between the late 1600s and mid-1800s. Slaves would stand in a circle, or rather a ring, and would shuffle around it counterclockwise, keeping their feet in contact with the floor as they maintained a steady rhythm. They would jerk with their shoulders as they moved through space, interjecting with shouts of call and response. Originally started as a form of exercise on the ships, this dance eventually grew to serve as an emotional outlet and a shared source of strength to an otherwise subjugated community. Historian Sterling Stuckey describes in his book, Slave Culture, Nationalist Theory and the Foundations of Black America, quote, "The ring shout was the main context in which Africans recognized values common to them, the values of ancestor worship and contact, communication and teaching through storytelling and trickster expressions, and various other symbolic devices," end quote. Dance and life were intrinsically linked in this culture, and as American novelist and anthropologist Harold Corlander describes, quote, "Dance is what defines a shout, for shouting was in reality dancing," end quote. Dance here is not just movement for movement's sake. Rather, it's a powerful medium wherein a message is conveyed. These people were dancing not to make pretty moves in space, but for survival. Over time, the ring shout developed into the cakewalk, a dance of mockery performed by black slaves for their white owners, where the winner would get a piece of cake essentially for successfully acting as the most pretentious white man. The unknowing white owners would throw lavish parties for their friends, building makeshift stages out of boards for their slaves to dance on. Jackie Maloney further describes these events in her book with, quote, white spectators saw the event as entertainment, while the slaves used it as an opportunity for keeping up the spirit by celebrating shared values, experiences, and feelings," end quote. These occasions, while sort of backhanded, served as an opportunity for African American slaves to develop their community. Maloney continues by saying, "Recreational activities resulted in tighter communal bonds, social cohesion, and cooperation. All classes of slaves were brought together in some common pursuits. Slave festivities eased the pain of labor," end quote. Dance was not only a way of building community for these slaves, but it offered respite from their ongoing struggles of daily life. Again, dance and life were intrinsically linked, where movement was the catalyst for strength. Most recently, the hip-hop formed group in Black culture in America fighting oppression by breakdancing, drawing graffiti, DJing, and making hip-hop music. The combination of these four elements together developed into a subculture where uncensored and aggressive movement allowed silenced voices to finally be heard. and as the form was passed through generations by word of mouth, the hip-hop lifestyle spread. As Jeff Chang explains in his book, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, A History of the Hip-Hop Generation, quote, "The life and death struggles were happening at the local level, where hip-hop activists were busy fighting in the streets, neighborhoods, school boards, city halls, state legislatures, and corporate offices. This in time, the whole world would not be watching. Global media monopolies could make sure of that. But the hip-hop generation was pushing forward in a complicated world, in more sophisticated ways than previous generations ever had." End quote. Hip-hop was a movement where dance was an equal part contributor. Each medium worked in tandem with the others to convey powerful messages, and again, movement for movement's sake didn't necessarily exist in this circumstance. Dance was an expressive tool that allowed young people in the streets of New York to feel as though their messages were being heard. They didn't need lights or a stage or even a microphone, they just needed to be seen. Several modern dance companies today choreograph to question and reflect on socio-political discourse. Companies include Dance Exchange, a group out of Washington, D.C., whose mission, as stated on their website, is to create dances that arise from asking, who gets to dance? Where's the dance happening? What is it about? Why does it matter? And New York City company Urban Bushwomen, whose mission is to create dance and to create community. I happen to think, however, that real change comes from leaving the stage and joining the people directly in their community. To some extent, I'll argue that today's flash mobs, or closely related events like sort of flash mobs, are yesterday's ring shouts. Take out the terrible connotation of slavery, and both events offer people gathering in support of one another, sharing in an experience that's intended to empower an important cause. It's an event where people are not only raising awareness of an issue, but it's a real act of commitment to that matter. Simply put, the flash mob ring shout is as much of a dance as elaborate choreography on stage. Jackie Maloney writes, quote, "Even in the face of tremendous adversity, African-American vernacular dance evinces an affirmation and celebration of life." She goes on to say that Black dance is a source of energy, joy, and inspiration, a spiritual antidote to oppression, and a way to lighten work, teach social values, and strengthen institutions. It also teaches the unity of mind and body and regenerates mental and physical power, end quote. Circumstantially, yes, Maloney's description is a clear reflection of the African-American dance culture, but similar to the ring shout, I think it can be applied much more universally, as this is just one example of how dance is a confluence of different backgrounds espousing a particular message. To borrow Maloney's words, as a Russian Jew whose great-grandmother remembers both escaping Russia via Underground Railroad and also dancing at my father's bar mitzvah, I think movement, generally speaking, has the potential to be a source of energy, joy, and inspiration. I think dance teaches social values while also strengthening institutions. Dance dissolves socioeconomic barriers and instead emphasizes commonalities between people, because again, it's the universal language that allows two people with otherwise nothing in common to stand united. There's power in numbers, and even more power when those numbers shimmy.